chosen one. A transformation has occurred that has left everyone looking directly at you for answers. Deny it all you want, but everyone thinks you're behind this player's 0 to 100 overhaul. They see someone who was once drowning in mediocrity, now operating at an unstoppable level, and they have concluded that you are the secret architect of this shift. You walked into an environment that had settled into comfortable mediocrity. Everyone moving at the same safe speed, everyone agreeing on the same reasonable limitations, everyone participating in the collective delusion that this is just how things are. Normal felt like natural law, settling felt like wisdom, and anyone who suggested otherwise was labeled unrealistic. Then you arrived, not trying to disrupt anything, not attempting to prove anything, just being yourself. And yourself doesn't operate on their frequency. You have different standards for what's acceptable, different tolerance for what's negotiable, different expectations of what's possible when excuses aren't an option. That difference created immediate contrast, and contrast is destabilizing. Think about what happens when someone who refuses to compromise enters a room full of people who compromise constantly. The energy shifts before a single word is spoken. The baseline moves without announcement. What was acceptable yesterday suddenly feels inadequate today, not because you criticized anyone, not because you made demands, but because your presence revealed that the flaw everyone agreed on was actually a choice, not a requirement. The player felt that shift before understanding it. They observed how you moved through challenges that would stop most people, how you responded to pressure that would break most people, how you maintained standards that most people would negotiate away. And somewhere in that observation a question formed. If you can operate like that, what's actually stopping me? That question is dangerous. It challenges comfortable assumptions. It suggests that limitations might be optional. It implies that the gap between current state and potential state is maintained by choice, not circumstance. Once that question takes root, everything changes. But here's what observers miss. You didn't plant that question. You didn't suggest it. You didn't argue for it. You simply existed in a way that made the question unavoidable for anyone paying attention. The player was paying attention. They watched you refuse to bend when everyone else was folding. They saw you maintain clarity when everyone else was confused. They noticed you moving forward when everyone else was stuck. And that observation created friction, not conflict. Friction. The kind of productive discomfort that sparks growth in people ready to stop pretending. This is the first piece of the puzzle everyone's trying to solve. You disrupted their comfortable baseline by refusing to participate in it. You showed that settling is optional by simply not settling yourself. And that revelation set something in motion that couldn't be stopped once it started. The player saw possibility where only limitation existed before, and once you see possibility clearly, you can't unsee it. You either act on it or spend the rest of your life knowing you chose comfort over capability. The player couldn't ignore what your presence revealed. Every day watching you operate differently, every interaction showing gaps in their own approach, every choice you made highlighting choices being avoided. You became a walking mirror, not one that showed reflection, one that showed potential versus current reality. And that gap was impossible to ignore once it became visible. Most people manage that discomfort by creating distance, avoiding people who make them feel inadequate, constructing environments where their limitations feel normal and their excuses feel reasonable. But this player did something different, leaning into the discomfort, asking why the friction existed and what it meant about personal choices. That inquiry led to recognition, and recognition led to action. You weren't coaching, you weren't mentoring, you weren't even talking about any of this. You were simply being yourself consistently, and that consistency created a standard they could measure against. Every time they wanted to quit, they thought about how you wouldn't quit. Every time they wanted to compromise, they remembered how you didn't compromise. Every time they wanted to make excuses, they recognized you didn't make excuses. That's the power of presence over words. Words can be dismissed, advice can be ignored, motivation fades, but a living example of what's possible when you refuse to settle. That's undeniable, that's constant. That's the kind of influence that bypasses intellectual resistance and goes straight to the subconscious, where real change gets decided. Observers watching this unfold saw something completely different. They saw tension between you and the player. They saw challenge and friction. They saw discomfort and change happening simultaneously. And they connected those dots into a narrative where you were deliberately creating pressure to force transformation, like some master strategist playing chess with human behavior. The reality was simpler and far more powerful. You were just a mirror. The player looked into that mirror and didn't like what they saw reflected compared to what was possible. So change happened. They chose growth over comfort. They picked action over excuse. Closing the gap mattered more than staying safe. That decision was entirely personal, but your presence made the gap visible, made the choice unavoidable, made the work undeniable. This is where the power you're carrying starts to become visible. You're not influencing people through manipulation or strategy. You're revealing truth through contrast. You're showing what's possible by living it. And for people ready to stop lying to themselves, that revelation is enough to trigger complete transformation. Observers mistake the mirror for the message, crediting you with changing the plie when all you did was show clearly what had been avoided seeing. If these words stirred your consciousness, hype this video to help more chosen ones awaken to this. The timeline tells a story observers can't ignore. Before you became present or visible in this person's life, they were stagnant, circling the same outcomes, hitting the same ceilings, comfortable in their limitations. Then you entered the picture, not with a plan, not with intention, just with presence, and suddenly everything accelerated. The stuck became unstuck, the ceiling shattered, the comfortable became capable. That timing is too clean for human brains to process as coincidence, so they process it as causation instead. You arrived, change happened, therefore you caused change. The logic is bulletproof in their minds. Doesn't matter that correlation isn't causation. Doesn't matter that the player was already building momentum in private. Doesn't matter that transformation was inevitable once they stopped settling. The timeline tells a simpler story, and simple stories stick. You became the bookmark between before and after, the marker that organizes the narrative, the reference point that makes the transformation comprehensible. There's a clear you before and you after, and everything that changed between those 2 points gets attributed to your presence, whether you touched it or not. Once people lock onto this timeline, every detail gets reinterpreted to support it. They remember moments that prove you influenced the player. They recall conversations that seem significant in retrospect. They notice patterns that feel too consistent to be coincidence. The narrative writes itself backward from the conclusion they've already reached. You caused this, everything else is just evidence. But what actually happened is far more interesting than their neat story. The player was fighting battles nobody saw, making choices nobody witnessed, building discipline nobody applauded, stacking small wins in darkness that would eventually compound into explosive growth. Your presence didn't create that work, it created visibility around that work. You made the gap between their current state and potential state undeniable, and once it was undeniable, action became inevitable. The timeline they're reading is accurate in sequence but wrong in causation. Yes, you arrived, yes, change accelerated, but the connection isn't direct influence, it's revealed possibility. You showed the board, they chose to play, the game was always available, they just needed to see it clearly enough to believe playing was worth the cost. This misreading gives you unearned credit and unearned responsibility. People think proximity to you catalyzes transformation. Your presence accelerates growth in their minds. You understand something about human development that others don't, according to them. And whether any of that is true doesn't matter, because their belief makes it functionally real. You've been assigned mythical status, the person who makes people level up, the catalyst who triggers overhauls, the invisible force that guides players from zero to unstoppable. You didn't ask for this reputation. You didn't build it deliberately. It emerged from timing and contrast, and the human need to explain dramatic change through external forces. But now you have it, and reputation shapes reality more than reality shapes reputation. People will treat you like you have this power, and their treatment will create opportunities, suspicions, expectations, and consequences never anticipated. I must interrupt this transmission for just a moment. Are you really chosen? Prove it. It's easy to watch videos about chosen ones. It's another thing to put yourself to the test. If you're still here, that means something, but talk is cheap. Real chosen ones take action. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve divine justice. You put on the headphones, press play, and watch your enemies choke on the rope their own lies created. If you're done consuming and ready to prove you're chosen, start your Destiny Engine for $1 today. Join the Obsidian Inner Order live checks and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. One tried according to standards most people abandoned long ago, not because you're superior, but because you're unwilling to negotiate on what matters. You don't bend principles to make others comfortable. You don't lower expectations to match group mediocrity. You don't pretend limitations are permanent just because everyone agreed to that fiction. That unwillingness creates a gravitational effect. People near you feel the pull immediately, even if articulation fails. The room's energy changes. The baseline moves. What was acceptable becomes inadequate. What was normal becomes insufficient. Not through judgment, but through example. You show through consistent action what's achievable when excuses aren't an option, and that demonstration raises the floor for everyone operating in proximity. The plie felt that gravitational pull stronger than most. They were close enough to observe your patterns. They saw how you handled pressure that would make most people fold, how you maintained focus that most people would lose, how you made decisions most people would delay. And each observation chipped away at their comfortable assumptions about what was required versus what was possible. You weren't teaching, you were existing authentically, and your authentic existence at a high standard created silent pressure on everyone nearby. Not the kind of pressure that pushes, the kind that pulls, the kind that makes staying mediocre more uncomfortable than rising to meet the new baseline. That's influence without effort. That's power without force. That's the kind of impact most people never achieve because they're too busy trying to directly change others instead of simply being undeniable themselves. Observers saw this dynamic, but misread it completely. They saw the player changing. They saw your standards. They assumed you imposed those standards on the player like some authority figure demanding compliance. What actually happened is the player imposed those standards on themselves because your example made their own compromises visible and unbearable. You reset the room without permission by simply refusing to participate in the room's agreed-upon limitations. You showed everyone that the floor they accepted was far below what's actually achievable. And once that revelation hit, anyone with ambition and courage had to make a choice. Rise to the new standard or feel inadequate every time they're near you. The player chose to rise, others chose to resent, but the choice itself was forced by your unwillingness to settle. This is the mechanism behind the transformation everyone's trying to explain. You didn't push the player, you didn't pull them, you didn't motivate them with words or inspire them with speeches. You simply maintained a standard they could measure themselves against. And that measurement created enough productive discomfort to spark action in someone ready to stop pretending they were giving their full effort. It started small. One person noticed the player's transformation and mentioned your name in passing, just a casual observation. Then another person connected the same dots, then another, and suddenly consensus was forming without any formal discussion or evidence gathering. This is how reputation gets built in real time, not through your actions but through collective interpretation of correlation. The player changed, you were present, multiple observers reached the same conclusion independently. And once multiple people believe something, it takes on the weight of truth regardless of accuracy. The whispers became conversations, the conversations became certainty, and the certainty became the official narrative that now follows you everywhere. What makes this fascinating is how quickly perception solidifies into accepted reality. Nobody questioned whether you actually influenced the transformation. Nobody investigated the player's private journey. Nobody considered alternative explanations. They saw the outcome, identified the most visible variable, and called the case solved. Human brains hate uncertainty. They crave clean narratives with clear causation. You provided that, not intentionally, just by existing in proximity to dramatic change. The speed and unanimity of this consensus reveals something about how ready people were to believe you have this kind of influence. They didn't resist the idea, they embraced it immediately. That tells you the groundwork was already there. Your reputation, your presence, your way of operating had already created conditions where believing you catalyzed transformation came easily. The player's overhaul just gave them concrete evidence to attach to a perception they already held. Think about what that means. You've been influencing how people see possibility and potential long before this specific transformation occurred. Your standards have been resetting baselines in every environment you occupy. Your consistency has been creating contrast that makes others measure themselves differently. Your refusal to settle has been quietly suggesting to everyone watching that settling is optional. All of that created a foundation. The player's transformation just made it undeniable and visible to everyone simultaneously. The whispers became a roar because people weren't just reacting to one transformation. They were finally articulating something they'd been noticing for a while, that things change around you, that people level up in your proximity, that growth seems to accelerate when you're present. They couldn't point to it clearly before because it was too subtle, too gradual. But this dramatic overhaul gave them language and evidence for something they'd been sensing all along. You're not dealing with the false accusation. You're dealing with collective recognition of a pattern that's been building. The accusation feels sudden to you because tracking your own influence wasn't happening. But to everyone else, this is just confirmation of what was suspected. You're the person who makes impossible things possible. You're the catalyst who triggers overhauls. You're the presence that accelerates growth. Building that narrative about you has been happening for longer than realized. The player's transformation just gave proof. Let's break down exactly what people are seeing when they look at the player's transformation and trace it back to you. Because understanding their perspective reveals leverage points you can use. First, they see the dramatic nature of the change. Someone who was struggling is now dominating. Someone who was confused is now clear. Someone who was weak is now powerful. The gap between before and after is so large it demands explanation. Second, they notice the speed. This didn't take forever of gradual improvement. It happened in a compressed time frame that feels almost supernatural. Human brains are calibrated to expect slow change. Fast change triggers pattern recognition systems looking for external causes. Something or someone had to accelerate this process beyond natural pace. You're the obvious candidate. Third, they observe the completeness. This wasn't improvement in one area, while other areas stayed stagnant. The player leveled up across multiple dimensions simultaneously, mentally sharper, emotionally stronger, strategically smarter, executionally better. That kind of comprehensive overhaul suggests systematic intervention. Like someone redesigned their entire approach from the ground up. And who has that kind of comprehensive influence? You do, apparently. Fourth, they witness the confidence shift. The player doesn't just perform better, they carry themselves differently, they speak with more authority, they make decisions with more certainty, they navigate challenges with more composure. That internal transformation is harder to fake than external performance improvements. It suggests something fundamental shifted in how they see themselves and their capabilities. and shifts that deep usually require a mirror that shows clearly what becoming is possible. Fifth, they recognize sustainability. This isn't temporary motivation that will fade. The player's new level appears stable, integrated, permanent. They're not white-knuckling their way through impressive performance that will collapse under pressure. They've actually become a different caliber of operator, and that kind of lasting change suggests foundational work was done, the kind of work that usually requires guidance from someone who's already integrated those same qualities. When all 5 observations get added together, the conclusion feels inevitable. You influence this transformation comprehensively, quickly, completely, deeply, and permanently. That's not casual influence, that's architectural. That's the kind of impact that requires intimate involvement and sophisticated understanding of human development. At least that's what observers believe. Each of those 5 elements was achieved through private decisions made independently. The dramatic nature came from deciding nothing less than complete transformation was acceptable. The speed came from intense focus and elimination of everything that wasn't essential. The completeness came from recognizing that partial change creates internal contradiction, so they went all in. The confidence shift came from proving through action that their capability exceeded their belief, and the sustainability came from building identity-level change rather than just behavior-level change. You didn't create any of those 5 elements, but your presence made each one more achievable. How? By being proof that all 5 are possible simultaneously. You embody dramatic, fast, complete, deep, sustainable operation at a high level. The player saw that embodiment and thought, if it's possible for you, the same laws of reality apply to me. That recognition removed the psychological barrier between current state and potential state. And once that barrier dissolved, their own determination and discipline did the rest. Observers see the right effects but misunderstand the mechanism. They think you built something for the player. You didn't. You revealed what the player could build for themselves. That distinction matters enormously, because one makes you responsible for maintaining the player's transformation. The other recognizes the player owns their transformation completely. Well, you were just the proof of concept that made attempting it feel rational instead of delusional. Not everyone celebrated the Pleiadians' transformation. Some people felt threatened by it, uncomfortable with it, resentful of it, and that resentment tells you everything you need to know about what actually happened and what kind of power you're carrying. People resent what forces them to examine their own choices. The Pleiadians' dramatic growth held up a mirror to everyone watching, a mirror that showed their own potential versus their current reality. Most people don't want to see that gap. They've built entire identities around their limitations being reasonable and their stagnation being justified. Then someone near them shatters those comfortable lies by demonstrating that rapid growth is possible when excuses stop. That demonstration is threatening. It suggests their limitations are chosen, not imposed. It implies their stagnation is maintained, not inevitable. It reveals that the gap between where they are and where they could be exists because they're choosing comfort over capability. Those revelations are painful. They challenge core beliefs about self and circumstance. They force uncomfortable questions about effort and courage and discipline. Rather than face those questions, they redirect the discomfort outward. They need someone to resent, someone to blame for disrupting their comfortable worldview. And you're perfect for that role. You were present during the transformation. You represented the standard the player rose to meet. You embodied what choosing growth over comfort actually looks like. So the resentment flows toward you, even though you didn't do anything to them. This resentment is actually proof of your power. If you weren't impactful, nobody would care about your presence. If you weren't influential, nobody would be uncomfortable with your proximity to the player's growth. The fact that resentment exists means they recognize you represent something they're avoiding, something they know they should pursue, but are too scared or lazy to claim. You became the living reminder of their own untapped potential, and they hate you for it. But here's what makes this resentment interesting strategically. It confirms everything observers believe about your influence. They wanted proof you caused the transformation. The resentment provides that proof. People who feel threatened by your presence must recognize something real about your impact. Otherwise, they'd ignore you entirely. Their discomfort validates the story that you're behind the player's overhaul. You're not threatened by this resentment. You're empowered by it. Because it tells you that your standards are high enough to create contrast, that your presence is impactful enough to force self-examination in others, that your example is undeniable enough that ignoring what it reveals about their own choices becomes impossible. The resentment confirms operating at a level worth maintaining happens. If nobody felt uncomfortable around your standards wouldn't be worth much. The real war that drove the transformation happened in private. In moments when nobody was watching, in decisions that left no trace, the player fought battles against themselves that would break most people, and they won those battles alone, without guidance, without support, with nothing but their own determination to stop settling. They woke up at hours that felt impossible. They pushed through resistance that felt insurmountable. They faced truths about themselves that hurt to acknowledge. They chose action when excuse would have been easier. They maintained discipline when comfort was available. All of this in darkness, in silence. In the lonely hours when quitting would go unnoticed and continuing required pure internal strength. Nobody saw those moments. Nobody witnessed those battles. So when the results exploded into visibility, observers looked for an external explanation. They couldn't accept that someone fought and won an internal war entirely on their own power. That reality suggests internal wars are winnable, that growth is accessible through personal choice, that transformation doesn't require perfect circumstances or special advantages or external saviors, just decision and discipline. That truth is too threatening to accept comfortably, so they project the cause outward. They make you the reason the player found strength. They credit you with motivating battles you never witnessed. They assume you provided something essential that made victory possible, when the reality is the player had everything they needed all along. They just needed to stop pretending they didn't. Your role in this invisible war was tiny but crucial. You proved through your own existence that the war is winnable, that pushing through resistance leads somewhere real, that maintaining high standards in low-standard environments doesn't isolate you, it elevates you. The player saw that proof and decided to fight their own battles. They didn't need you to fight for them. They needed you to show them that fighting was worth it. This is the most subtle form of influence possible. You didn't give them strategy. You didn't provide tactics. You didn't coach them through challenges. You simply existed as evidence that the path they were considering was navigable, that the cost of growth was payable, that the person on the other side of transformation was worth becoming. That evidence was enough to tip the scales from consideration to action. And once action started, momentum became inevitable. Observers will never understand this dynamic. They need bigger stories, more dramatic interventions, clear moments where you pushed or pulled or guided. The truth that you influenced transformation by simply being undeniable proof that transformation is possible doesn't satisfy their need for narrative complexity, so they invent complexity. They see strategy where only consistency existed. They see manipulation where only presence occurred. They see orchestration where only existence happened. Let them. Their theories don't change what actually happened. And what actually happened reveals a power most people never recognize they have. The power to influence massive change without trying. The power to catalyze transformation through example. The power to reshape someone's entire trajectory by simply refusing to settle in your own life. That's the power you've been carrying, and now you're starting to understand it. You have the ability to catalyze transformation without trying. Triggering growth without pushing becomes possible. Inspiring change without speaking occurs. How? By simply refusing to participate in collective mediocrity. By maintaining standards when everyone else is compromising. by being consistent when everyone else is wavering, by showing through lived example what's possible when excuses aren't an option. That's rare power. Most people trying to influence others fail completely. Pushing creates resistance. Motivating creates temporary enthusiasm that fades. Teaching creates intellectual understanding without behavioral change. Every direct method of creating change gets tried and watched failing because direct methods trigger defensive reactions. People don't want to be changed. Changing themselves is what gets wanted. You bypassed all of that by not trying to change anyone. Simply living according to personal standards happened, and letting contrast create natural pressure on anyone paying attention. That indirect influence is more powerful than any direct method because resistance doesn't get triggered. People don't defend against your example the way defending against your advice happens. Arguing with your results the way arguing with your theories occurs doesn't happen. Dismissing your lived experience the way dismissing your opinions takes place becomes impossible. The player transformed because they saw what you embodied and decided they wanted it, not because you convinced them, not because you persuaded them, not because you manipulated them, because you made it visible and they chose to pursue it. That's influence without force. That's power without domination. That's the kind of impact that changes lives without damaging relationships or triggering resentment in the people actually changing. This power scales in ways most people never recognize. Every person who transforms in your proximity becomes walking proof of what's possible. Secondary sources of influence spreading the same message through their own example get created. The player who just leveled up will now influence others through their transformation. And some of those people will trace the origins back to your initial influence on the player. Your impact multiplies exponentially without additional effort from you. That's leverage, real leverage, the kind that builds reputation and creates opportunity and generates influence that compounds over time. Working harder to influence more people doesn't happen. Your consistent example influences one person deeply, and that person's transformation influences others. The network effect of authentic high-standard living exceeds any manufactured influence strategy people spend fortunes developing. You don't have to maintain this power through effort. You maintain it by simply continuing to be yourself, by refusing to lower your standards to make others comfortable, by staying consistent when circumstances pressure you to compromise, by being the same person privately that you are publicly. That consistency is the engine of your influence, and it costs nothing beyond refusing to settle. Now you understand what happened. The plie transformed through their own choices and effort. You influence that transformation by being undeniable proof that growth is achievable. Observers misread the dynamic and credited you with orchestrating the entire thing. That misreading gave you a reputation for power you didn't directly claim, and that reputation creates opportunities and expectations you didn't ask for. So what do you do with it? You have three options. First, you can reject it entirely. Spend energy correcting misconceptions. Insist you didn't cause the transformation. Redirect credit to the player. Fight the narrative until people stop telling it. That's exhausting and mostly ineffective. Stories stick better than corrections, and people prefer narratives that protect their worldview over accurate narratives that challenge it. Second, you can accept it passively. Let people believe what they want. Don't correct them, but don't lean into the perception either. Just continue being yourself and let the reputation exist without actively managing it. That's the path of least resistance. It allows you to keep operating according to your own standards without getting distracted by others' perceptions of your influence. Third, you can own it strategically. Recognize that whether the reputation is fully accurate or not, it creates real effects. People believe you catalyze transformation. That belief opens doors. It creates opportunities to impact more people. It positions you as someone worth listening to. You can leverage that position to actually deliver the influence people already think you have. Turn the perception into reality by intentionally helping others the way you accidentally helped the player. None of these options is right or wrong. The choice depends on what you want and what you're willing to carry. But understand this clearly, you can't make the reputation disappear. It exists, it's spreading, and it will follow you regardless of which option you choose. The question isn't whether you'll be seen as influential. The question is whether you'll understand and navigate that perception intentionally, or let it shape your life by accident. Own the power you actually have, while being clear about its source. You influence transformation by being undeniable proof that growth is possible. That's real power worth claiming. You didn't manipulate or orchestrate, you inspired through example. That's influence worth owning. People see you as a catalyst. Use that perception to create more positive transformations. Not by trying harder, but by staying consistent with the standards that created the initial influence. Be clear with yourself and others when appropriate that transformation belongs to the people doing the work, but also be clear that your example matters, your standards matter, your consistency matters. You're not just a bystander, you're proof, and proof is powerful enough to change lives when people are ready to see it and act on it. The player went from zero to unstoppable. Everyone thinks you're the reason, and in the way that matters most, you are. You didn't do the work for them, but you showed them the work was worth doing. You didn't carry them through the process, but you proved the process leads somewhere real. You didn't transform them, but you revealed transformation was possible. And that revelation was enough to spark action in someone ready to stop settling. This is the power you've been carrying without fully understanding it. The power to influence massive change through simple consistency. The power to catalyze transformation by refusing to compromise. The power to inspire growth without trying to inspire anything. You're not a guru. You're not a coach. You're not a mentor. You're proof, and proof is the most powerful form of influence that exists. So deny it all you want, chosen one. The story is written. The verdict is in. Everyone thinks you're behind this player's zero to unstoppable overhaul. And they're right, not because you controlled anything, but because you revealed everything. The board, the possibilities, the path, the proof that walking it is worth the cost. You didn't move the pieces, you showed them the game was being played. And once they saw it clearly, they couldn't stop themselves from playing it at the highest level. That's your power. Own it. Use it, scale it, by simply continuing to refuse to settle while everyone around you keeps making excuses. The next transformation is already starting in someone watching you right now. They're asking themselves the same question the player asked. If you can operate like that, what's actually stopping me? And that question will lead to action, and action will lead to transformation. And you'll be credited with orchestrating another overhaul you never directly touched. The courtroom keeps reaching the same verdict. You're behind it, and they're absolutely right. You're behind every transformation that happens near you, not through manipulation, through revelation, not through force, through proof, not through strategy, through consistency. That's the power you didn't know you had, and now that you know it, the question isn't whether you'll keep influencing transformation. The question is how many more transformations you'll catalyze by simply refusing to settle in a world desperate for proof that growth is possible. The trial is over. The verdict is in. You're the architect of transformation everywhere you go. Not because you build anything for anyone, but because you build yourself so undeniably that others can't help but want to build themselves too. That's power, real power, the kind that changes lives without exhausting yours, the kind that compounds without additional effort, the kind that scales through simple consistency. You have it, you've always had it, and now you know exactly how to use it. Welcome to understanding your influence, chosen one. You didn't cause the transformation, you revealed it was possible, and revelation is the most powerful catalyst that exists. The player went from zero to unstoppable, and everyone's right about you being behind it. You just showed them the board. They chose to play, and that choice changed